The day I was supposed to be promoted, I sat in the front row of our quarterly company meeting, wearing the navy suit my husband had helped me choose that morning. I had spent 8 years earning that moment. Late nights, difficult clients, missed holidays, projects I rescued when everyone else had already given up. I never expected special treatment. I only wanted the position I had worked for. When our CEO stepped onto the stage, I already knew my name was coming, except it didn't. Instead, he announced a promotion for Daniel Reeves, a junior employee who had joined our department less than 2 years earlier. The applause started immediately. I smiled politely. Then I looked toward my husband, Mark, who worked in the same company. He was sitting several rows behind me, and he was smiling. Not the confused smile of someone trying to understand what had happened. A satisfied smile. That was the first thing that made me uneasy. The second came that evening. I had gone upstairs to grab my charger when Mark's phone, lying on the kitchen counter, lit up with a message. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't even supposed to touch his phone. But the preview showed my boss's name. Then another message appeared. I shouldn't have opened it. But something inside me told me that what happened at work that morning hadn't been an accident. What I found wasn't an affair. It was worse. There were messages, dates, payment records, and one phrase that appeared again and again. Once she's removed, everything goes according to plan. I read it twice. Then I saw the attached document. My hands went completely still, because the agreement wasn't just about my job. It had my name on it, and whoever created it had already decided what was supposed to happen to me. The morning of my promotion meeting began like any other Tuesday. At least, that's what I told myself. Outside our house in Arlington, Virginia, the sky was pale gray, and a thin layer of rain covered the windshield of my car. I sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "You've got this," I whispered. I had been with Hamilton and Pierce Consulting for 8 years, long enough to know which elevators stalled between floors, which conference rooms had broken heating vents, and which executives preferred numbers on a page instead of long presentations. I had also learned something more important. Good work didn't always speak for itself. Sometimes you had to keep showing up until people couldn't ignore it. My husband, Mark, had kissed my forehead before I left. "Big day," he said. "I think so. You've earned it." His words should have comforted me. Instead, something about the way he said them stayed in my mind. Not because he sounded unhappy, because he sounded certain. At the office, everything looked normal. People hurried through the lobby carrying coffee and laptops. The security desk was crowded. Someone near the elevators was laughing about a client who had changed a contract 3 times overnight. I walked into my department and found a small, white envelope sitting on my desk. Inside was a handwritten note from my coworker, Susan. "Good luck today. You deserve this." I smiled. That meant more to me than she probably realized. The promotion wasn't just about money. It would mean becoming Regional Operations Director, a position I had been quietly preparing for since my previous director retired. I had led 2 major accounts, trained new analysts, and spent the previous 6 months building the proposal that had brought our biggest client back from the verge of leaving. My performance review had been excellent. My department head had told me, "If the board approves the position, you're the strongest internal candidate." So I believed I knew what was coming. At 10:30, everyone gathered in the main conference room. The glass walls overlooked downtown Washington, where traffic moved slowly beneath the rain. Our CEO, Richard Collins, stood at the front beside the presentation screen. Mark was there too. He had transferred into corporate finance 3 years earlier, and although we worked in different departments, our schedules occasionally overlapped. I caught his eye. He smiled. I smiled back. Then Richard cleared his throat. "Thank you, everyone. We have one important announcement this morning." My heart began beating faster. Richard spoke about company growth, new contracts, and leadership changes. Then he said, "After careful consideration, the board has decided to appoint Daniel Reeves as our new Regional Operations Director." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. "Daniel?" I looked around the room. People were already clapping. Daniel stood up, visibly surprised. He looked toward me. I smiled and applauded, because what else could I do? Then my eyes moved toward Mark. He wasn't surprised. He was watching Daniel with the same quiet satisfaction someone might have after seeing a plan work exactly as expected. I kept clapping. but my hands had gone cold. After the meeting, Susan followed me into the hallway. Emily. I turned. You okay? I'm fine. You're sure? I nodded. I've been disappointed before. That wasn't true. Not like this. An hour later, Richard called me into his office. He motioned toward the chair across from his desk. Emily, I want you to know this wasn't a reflection of your performance. I folded my hands in my lap. Then what was it? He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than his words. Daniel has certain executive support. From whom? Richard leaned back. I can't discuss internal board considerations. I nodded slowly. I understand. He studied me. You're taking this very professionally. I've had time to practice. He almost smiled. Then his expression changed. Don't make any sudden decisions. I looked at him. Why would I? Because sometimes people react emotionally when they feel overlooked. I don't. I know. There was something uncomfortable in his voice, like he was warning me without being allowed to explain why. I left his office with more questions than answers. That evening, Mark cooked dinner. Pasta, garlic bread, and a bottle of wine. It should have felt ordinary. Instead, every time I looked at him, I remembered that smile. He noticed. You've been quiet. Long day. I heard about Daniel. I looked up. You did. People talk. What did they say? He shrugged. Nothing important. I watched him serve the pasta. Did you know Daniel was getting the position? His hand paused for half a second. Then he continued. No. It was a simple answer. Too simple. I didn't challenge him. After dinner, I went upstairs to change. When I came back down, Mark was in the shower. His phone was lying beside the kitchen sink. It buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. The screen lit up. A name appeared. Richard Collins. Under it was a message preview. She doesn't know yet. My stomach tightened. I stared at the phone. Another message appeared. We need to make sure she signs before Friday. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I had already seen enough to know that my promotion hadn't simply been given to someone else. Something had been arranged, and somehow, I was the only person in the room who hadn't been told the plan. I heard the shower upstairs shut off. I picked up my glass of water and walked toward the living room. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. But inside, something had changed. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't thinking about how to prove myself at work. I was wondering what exactly my husband and my boss believed I would sign. Then Mark walked downstairs. He looked at me. I smiled. And I said nothing. Mark walked into the living room with damp hair and a gray t-shirt, completely unaware that the last 30 seconds had changed the way I looked at him. He picked up his phone. Everything okay? I nodded. Yeah. He glanced at me for a moment, then slipped the phone into his pocket. That tiny movement told me something. He wasn't checking the message. He was making sure I hadn't. I didn't confront him. Instead, I asked, "How was your day?" "Busy." "Anything interesting?" He smiled faintly. "Not really." I watched his face. He was good at lying. Maybe not because he lied often, but because he had never given me a reason to doubt him before. For 12 years, I had trusted that man with everything. Our home, our finances, my fears, my career frustrations, the private parts of my life that I never shared with anyone else. And now I was sitting across from him wondering whether he had been quietly planning something behind my back. "I'm tired," I said. "I can tell." He kissed my cheek. I let him. Then I went upstairs. I didn't sleep much. Around 2 in the morning, I opened my laptop and reviewed every document I had from work. Performance evaluations, project reports, emails from clients, promotion discussions. Nothing looked unusual, but then I remembered something Richard had said earlier. Don't make any sudden decisions. Why would he say that? I searched my email for Daniel's name. There were dozens of messages. Most were routine. Then I found one from 3 weeks earlier. Daniel had asked me to review a financial projection. I had sent him the corrected version. At the bottom of the email, he had written, "Thanks, Emily. This is exactly what I needed." I stared at that sentence. What did he need it for? The next morning, I arrived at work early. I stopped at the coffee shop across the street before going upstairs. Susan was already there. She looked at me carefully. "You didn't sleep." "I slept." She raised an eyebrow. "Emily." I sighed. "I had a strange night." She waited. I lowered my voice. Did you know Daniel was being considered for my position? She shook her head. Not until yesterday. What about Richard? What do you mean? Did he ever tell you I was no longer the leading candidate?
No.
Susan looked genuinely confused. Then she said something that made me uncomfortable. Actually, I thought you had already been approved. I looked at her. Why? Because I saw the organizational chart. What organizational chart? She hesitated. It was on Daniel's screen last week. My pulse quickened. What did it show? She lowered her voice. Your name wasn't there. I felt a chill move through me. Whose name was? Daniel's. I stared through the coffee shop window at the traffic outside. Did it show my position? Susan nodded. Your position was still there. Meaning? She looked directly at me. Meaning you were still listed as an employee. That didn't make sense. If they weren't promoting me, why wasn't I being replaced? I thanked her and went upstairs. For the rest of the morning, I worked normally. At 11, I received an email from Human Resources asking me to review an updated employment agreement. My fingers stopped above the keyboard. The email said the document was a routine administrative update. I opened the attachment. The first page looked harmless. Salary, benefits, confidentiality. Then I reached page 4. There was a new clause regarding voluntary separation. I read it twice. The company could terminate my position under certain restructuring circumstances, but the language was vague enough to leave enormous discretion with management. I printed the document. Then I noticed something else. A signature line. Mine. At the bottom. I hadn't agreed to anything. I called HR. Is this required? The HR representative sounded nervous. It needs to be completed by Friday. Why? It's part of the restructuring. What restructuring? There was a pause. I think you should speak with your department head. I hung up. My phone rang almost immediately. Richard, come to my office. When I entered, he closed the door. You received the agreement. Yes. You haven't signed it.
No. His jaw tightened.
Emily, I need you to understand that this isn't personal. I sat across from him. Then why does the agreement change my employment status? It protects the company. From what? He looked away. From future disputes. I studied him. Who drafted it? Our legal department. Who requested it? He didn't answer. I waited. Finally, he said, you should consider the agreement carefully. I will. He nodded. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. The expression on his face changed. He stepped away from the desk and answered. Yes. I couldn't hear the other person, but I saw Richard's eyes move toward me. Then he said quietly, she's here. My stomach tightened. He listened for several seconds. Then he replied, no, she hasn't signed anything. He ended the call. I stood. Who was that? No one you need to worry about. I smiled politely. I disagree. I walked out before he could respond. That afternoon, I went through our shared financial accounts. I wasn't looking for evidence of fraud. I was trying to understand whether Mark had made any unusual transactions. There was one. A payment of $7,500 from our joint savings account. The description said, Consulting Services, R. Collins Advisory. My hands went cold. Richard Collins. I opened the transaction details. The payment had been made 11 days earlier. I checked Mark's account. Nothing. Then I checked our credit card. Another payment. $3,200. Same company. I sat motionless at my desk. There was no reason for my husband to pay my boss. None. I took screenshots and saved them to a private folder. Then I received a text from an unknown number. Stop looking into this if you know what's good for you. I stared at the message. There was no name, no explanation, just one sentence. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a picture of it and sent it to my personal email. Then I noticed the timestamp. The message had been sent less than 30 seconds after I accessed the financial account. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone was watching. And for the first time, I wondered whether the secret agreement wasn't designed to remove me from my job at all. Maybe my job was only the beginning. That evening, Mark came home carrying groceries. He kissed me as if nothing had happened. I watched him put the bags on the counter. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket. A notification appeared. I saw only 3 words before he turned the screen away. She's asking questions. And this time, I knew he wasn't talking about anyone else. I didn't ask Mark who had texted him. I didn't need to. The way he turned the phone face down told me enough. Instead, I opened one of the grocery bags and started putting things away. "You bought strawberries," I said. "You like them?" "I do." He smiled. For a few seconds, we looked like the same married couple we had been the week before. That was the strangest part. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with slammed doors and screaming. Sometimes it sits quietly across the kitchen island while your husband asks whether you want coffee. I went to bed early that night. Mark followed about 20 minutes later. I kept my eyes closed until I heard his breathing become steady. Then I quietly reached for my laptop. I had already copied the bank records. Now I wanted to understand the company agreement. The next morning, I contacted an employment attorney named Laura Bennett. She had been recommended by Susan's husband, who worked in corporate compliance. I didn't tell Laura everything over the phone. I simply said, "My employer wants me to sign a new employment agreement after unexpectedly passing me over for a promotion." She asked me to bring the document. We met at her office during my lunch break. Laura read the agreement silently. When she reached the separation clause, her expression changed. "This isn't a routine update." I thought so. She turned the document toward me. "Did they explain why they're asking you to sign this?" "They said restructuring." "Have they announced a restructuring?"
No.
"Have you been placed on disciplinary review?"
No.
"Have you received any performance warnings?" "Never." She tapped the page. "Then I wouldn't sign this." I nodded. I didn't. Laura continued reading. Then she stopped. "Emily, there's something unusual here."
What?
She pointed to a paragraph near the end. "This clause gives the company a broad release from certain claims if you voluntarily accept the separation terms." I looked at her. "Meaning? If they are preparing to terminate you, they maybe try to get you to sign away your ability to challenge it." My stomach tightened. "Can they do that?" "Not necessarily in the way they're presenting it. But don't sign anything until we understand why they're doing this." I took a breath. "Can you investigate the agreement?" "I can review it. But if you believe there may be fraud or a conflict of interest, we need evidence." "I have some." I showed her the bank transactions. Laura's expression became serious. "Who is our Collins advisory?" "My CEO." She looked at the screen again. "Your husband paid your CEO?" "From our joint account." "When?" 11 days ago." Laura leaned back. "Does your husband work for the same company?" "Yes." "Does he have access to corporate finances?" "Not directly. He's in finance." She was quiet for several seconds. "Don't confront him yet." I wasn't planning to. "Good." She handed the phone back to me. "Save everything. Emails, messages, financial records, anything connected to the agreement. And don't access accounts you're not authorized to access." "I won't." When I returned to the office, Susan was waiting near my desk. "You need to see something." She led me into an empty conference room. On her laptop was an email. It had been forwarded to her by mistake. The sender was Daniel. The recipient was someone in executive leadership. The subject line read, "Transition Plan E. Carter." I read the message. It discussed my responsibilities, client relationships, and anticipated departure. My name was everywhere. But there was something even more disturbing. The transition date was listed as 6 weeks away. I hadn't resigned. I hadn't been fired. I hadn't even been informed that my position was being eliminated. Someone had already planned my departure.
Susan looked at me.
"Emily, what is going on?" "I don't know." That was the truth. But I was beginning to understand something. The promotion had never really been about Daniel. It had been about moving me out of the way. I copied the email. Then I noticed the attachment. A spreadsheet. Susan hadn't opened it.
I did.
It contained a list of employees, salaries, projected severance payments, and legal expenses. Next to my name was a figure. $185,000. I stared at it. "What is that?" Susan shook her head. "I don't know." Then I noticed the column beside it. Projected settlement exposure. My heart began pounding. They weren't simply planning to terminate me. They were anticipating a legal dispute.
But why?
I hadn't done anything. I printed the spreadsheet and locked it in my desk. That evening, I drove home instead of going directly inside. I sat in the driveway for several minutes. Our house looked exactly the same.
The porch light was on.
The curtains were drawn. A delivery box sat beside the front door. Nothing looked threatening. Yet I suddenly felt like I was walking into a place where someone had been preparing for my absence. Inside, Mark was making dinner. "How was work?" "Busy." He smiled. "Mine too." I watched him for a moment. Then I asked casually, "Did you ever work with Richard on any consulting projects?" His hand stopped moving. "What kind of projects?" "I saw a payment from our account to his consulting company." His face changed. "Only slightly."
But I saw it.
"That." "Yes." "It was a reimbursement." "For what?" "Business expenses." I nodded. "What expenses?" He looked at me. "I don't remember." I didn't push. Instead, I said, "Okay." His shoulders relaxed. That told me more than his answer. Later that night, after Mark fell asleep, I opened my personal email. There was a new message from Laura. "I found something important in the agreement. Call me before you respond to HR." I called immediately. Her voice was quiet. "Emily, I traced the language in your agreement. To where?" "A previous contract used by your company in a confidential settlement." I sat upright. "What settlement?" "A former employee filed a claim against the company 2 years ago." "What happened?" "They settled privately." I waited. Laura continued. "The employee's name was Rebecca Carter." My heart stopped. "Carter?" "Yes." I stared at the wall. "My maiden name was Carter." "Laura," she interrupted gently. "I know." There was silence. "Rebecca Carter was your mother, wasn't she?" I couldn't speak. My mother had died 4 years earlier, and she had never told me she had ever sued the company I now worked for. Laura took a breath. "There's more." I gripped the phone. "What?" "The settlement agreement contains a clause that appears to have been carried into your new employment contract." "What does it say?" Laura hesitated. Then she said, "Emily, I think your mother may have left something behind that your employer is desperately trying to keep hidden." Before I could answer, my computer chimed. A new email had arrived. No subject, no sender name, just one attachment. I opened it. The first page was a scanned document. At the top was my mother's signature, and beneath it was a handwritten sentence that made my hands begin to shake. "If they ever try to make Emily sign this, give her the original file." I stared at the screen. Then I noticed the date. It had been written 4 years ago, the week before my mother died. I didn't sleep that night. I printed the document, closed my laptop, and sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable. I had seen it on birthday cards, grocery lists, Christmas notes, and the little reminders she used to leave on my refrigerator whenever she visited. The sentence on the scanned page kept running through my mind. "If they ever try to make Emily sign this, give her the original file." But who had written the message? And why had someone waited 4 years to send it to me? At 6:30 in the morning, another email arrived. This one contained only an address. A storage facility outside Alexandria. No explanation. I forwarded everything to Laura. She called within minutes. "Don't go alone." "I won't. I want you to meet me there." An hour later, Laura and I stood outside a small climate-controlled storage facility. The manager checked my identification, then looked at the access authorization. "Unit 314, he said. "Your mother rented it?" "Yes." He nodded. "She paid for 5 years in advance." I stared at him. 5 years. My mother had apparently planned for something she knew she might not live long enough to explain. The lock on the unit was old. Laura opened it. Inside were several boxes, a metal filing cabinet, and 2 plastic storage bins. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked like a secret worth destroying a career over. Then I saw my mother's handwriting on one of the boxes. "Emily, do not open until necessary." My throat tightened. Laura looked at me. "Your call." I opened it. Inside were copies of corporate reports, letters, tax documents, and photographs. Then I found a folder labeled Hamilton and Pierce, 2019. I opened it. The first document was a complaint filed by my mother against the company. She had worked there before I did. I had known that much. What I didn't know was why she left. According to the complaint, my mother had discovered irregular payments involving senior executives and outside consulting firms. One of those firms was R. Collins Advisory, Richard Collins's company. I sat down on the concrete floor. "This goes back 7 years." Laura nodded. "Apparently." Then I found something even more disturbing. A list of names, several executives, 2 outside consultants, and 1 employee from the finance department.
Mark.
My husband's name was on the list. I felt the room become strangely quiet. Laura took the page from my hands. "Don't assume what this means." "I know." But my voice didn't sound convincing. My husband had been working for Hamilton and Pierce for only 3 years. How could his name be connected to an investigation that started before we even met? Then I found a second document. It was a payment authorization, signed by Richard Collins. The recipient was R. Collins Advisory. The amount was $7,500. The date matched the first transfer from our joint account. I looked at Laura. He didn't reimburse my husband. What do you mean? The money moved from our account to Richard's company. Laura read the authorization again. Then your husband may have been acting as an intermediary. The thought made my stomach turn. I wanted to believe there was another explanation. There had to be. I searched the box again. At the bottom was a sealed envelope. My name was written across it. Emily. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from my mother. She wrote that she had discovered a pattern of payments involving executives and employees who were being pressured to sign separation agreements. She had tried to report it internally. Instead, the company had accused her of violating confidentiality. She refused to sign their settlement. And apparently, that was when things became dangerous for her professionally. Near the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "If you ever work there, don't trust anyone who tells you that a document is routine." I swallowed hard. Laura read over my shoulder. "There's something else." She pointed to the final paragraph. My mother had mentioned an encrypted digital file stored with an attorney. She named the attorney, Thomas Reed. I recognized the name. He had been my mother's lawyer. He had died 2 years ago, but his firm was still operating. We drove there that afternoon. The receptionist checked my name, then disappeared into a back office. A few minutes later, an older attorney named Michael Reed came out. "Emily Carter?" "Yes." He looked at Laura, then back at me. "You're Claire Carter's daughter?" "Yes." His expression softened. "She expected you might come." My heart began beating faster. "She did." He nodded. "Not specifically to me, but she left instructions." "What instructions?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, "Has Hamilton and Pierce asked you to sign anything recently?" I looked at Laura, then back at him. "Yes." He closed his eyes briefly. "Then it's time." He took us into a conference room. From a locked cabinet, he removed a small black hard drive. He placed it on the table. My father was instructed to release this only if certain conditions were met. What conditions? One of them was that Hamilton and Pierce attempted to force you into a separation agreement. I stared at the drive. "What's on it?" "Records your mother preserved before leaving the company." "About what?" He looked directly at me. "Payments, internal communications, and evidence concerning executives who used employees' private information to pressure them into leaving." Laura leaned forward. "Does it implicate Richard Collins?" Michael nodded. "But there's something you need to understand." "What?" "The records don't only involve Richard." He turned toward me. "They involve your husband." I couldn't move. Then my phone rang. It was Mark. I answered. "Where are you?" "At work." There was a pause. "No, you're not." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What?" "I know about the storage unit." My eyes met Laura's. Mark's voice became quieter. "Emily, you need to come home." "Why?" "Because there are things you don't understand." I stood. "What things?" He took a breath. Then he said something that made the room go cold. "Your mother wasn't the only person who knew about the agreement." The call ended. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Michael slowly turned the hard drive toward me. "Before you leave," he said, "there's one file you need to see." He connected the drive to his computer. A folder appeared on the screen. Its name was simple. Mark Carter. I stared at it. And then Michael clicked it open. The folder opened slowly. There were dozens of files inside. Emails, bank statements, scanned contracts, meeting notes, and photographs. My hands rested on the edge of the table as I stared at the screen. Laura leaned closer. Michael said nothing. The first document was an internal payment report dated 3 years earlier. Mark's name appeared repeatedly. But as I read further, I realized something I hadn't expected. He hadn't been receiving money. He had been documenting it. Every transfer, every suspicious payment, every employee who had been pressured into signing a separation agreement. Mark had been keeping records. I looked at Laura. Why would he do this? She opened another file. It was an email from Mark to my mother. The date was 6 months before my mother died. I don't know who else I can trust. My chest tightened. The next line explained that Mark had discovered financial irregularities inside the company while working in corporate finance. He had quietly copied records and given them to my mother because she had already begun investigating the same people. Then I saw the message that changed everything. If they realize Emily knows about any of this, they'll use her to get to me. I stopped breathing. Laura looked at me. Emily. I kept reading. Mark had married me knowing there was a possibility that the company would eventually connect us to my mother's investigation. But he had never told me. Not because he didn't care. Because he believed silence was protecting me. That didn't erase what he had done. It didn't excuse the lies. But suddenly, the strange payment from our account made sense. The $7,500 wasn't a payment to Richard. It was part of an arrangement Mark had created to keep Richard from discovering that Mark was cooperating with an outside investigator. I opened another file, a private investigator's report. It showed that Richard had been diverting company funds through consulting firms and using employment agreements to silence employees who discovered the transactions. Daniel's promotion had been part of the plan. My position would have been eliminated afterward, and the new agreement would have required me to waive certain claims before I was officially dismissed. I leaned back. So they needed my signature. Michael nodded. Exactly. Why mine? He looked at me. Because your mother's old complaint was never fully resolved. Laura opened the final document. It was a legal memorandum prepared by my mother's attorney shortly before she died. The memo explained that my mother had preserved evidence proving that the company had retaliated against employees who challenged financial misconduct. But the evidence could not be released without exposing people who were still working inside the company, including Mark. My eyes burned. For 4 years, I had believed my mother died carrying a painful secret. Instead, she had left behind a carefully constructed trail, and Mark had been following it. I left the law office and drove home alone. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table. He stood when I entered. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I placed the printed documents in front of him. Tell me the truth. He looked down. Then he nodded. I should have told you. Yes. I wanted to. But you didn't.
No.
His voice was quiet. I thought keeping you out of it would protect you. I looked at him. You let me believe you betrayed me. I know. You watched me lose my promotion. I didn't know Richard would do it that way. But you knew something was happening. Yes. I sat across from him. What was the agreement? Mark pushed a folder toward me. The original. I opened it. It wasn't an employment agreement. It was a settlement proposal. Hamilton and Pierce wanted me to sign a separation package in exchange for confidentiality. But there was a second page. A handwritten note from Richard. Once Emily signs, the old investigation becomes legally irrelevant. I stared at the sentence. Then I looked at Mark. What happens if I don't sign? He answered quietly. They have to defend the old allegations in court. That was the moment I understood. They hadn't been trying to fire me. They had been trying to make me voluntarily erase the evidence my mother left behind. I contacted Laura. Within days, she coordinated with federal investigators and the company's outside counsel. The evidence was authenticated. The financial records were reviewed. The payment trails were traced. Several executives resigned before formal proceedings began. Richard was placed on administrative leave. Daniel cooperated with investigators after admitting he had been promised the promotion in exchange for signing documents he didn't fully understand. And the agreement they had placed in front of me was never signed. I never got the promotion I had wanted. Instead, the board offered me something different. They asked me to lead an internal compliance division responsible for reviewing the company's financial practices and employee protections. I accepted. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted the company my mother had once believed could be better. Months later, I visited my mother's grave. The afternoon was cool, and the cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind moving through the trees. I placed a small bouquet beside her headstone. For years, I had thought justice would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt quieter than that. It felt like being able to breathe again. Mark and I eventually separated. There was too much damage between us to pretend everything could return to the way it had been. But I no longer hated him. He had made choices I couldn't accept. I had made choices too. The most important one was choosing not to become bitter. I stood beside my mother's grave for a few more minutes. Then I looked at her name carved into the stone. She had left me evidence. But more than that, she had left me a choice. I could stay silent because silence was easier. Or I could speak carefully, truthfully, and without destroying myself in the process. I chose the second. And for the first time since the morning my promotion disappeared, I felt completely at peace. I walked back toward my car without looking behind me. I didn't need to. The truth had finally found its way into the light. And that was enough. If you enjoy emotional stories about family, betrayal, hidden truths, and quiet justice, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.